And a good Wednesday morning to you, Quad Cities. The time right now is 9 o'clock on the dot, and it is time for Ask Andrew Live. It is so good to be back with you this week. We have seen a big uptick in the amount of weather, especially that's been going on the last couple of days. We're going to talk more about that and a look at your weather impact forecast as well from us here at Storm Track A. But a reminder first of what Ask Andrew is all about. Think of it as what I do during the week on Mondays and Wednesdays during GMQC, except it's the live version and it's your opportunity to interact with me live, either on our social media website channel there, or also, more importantly, on the WQAD 8 Plus app. So here's how it works. If you're not watching us on our social media stream, you can send a text message with your question. Remember to keep them weather related only, as we always say, don't make it weird. You can send that text to 309-304-0888, 309-304-0888. One more time in threes. They say in threes it sticks. 309-304-0888. Don't forget the legalese at the bottom of the screen there. Message and data rates may apply. Of course, check with your wireless provider. But that's how you get your question in, and then I will do my best to answer that live. We will leave enough time to get those questions in, of course, after we talk a little bit of weather. But if for some chance we do not get to your question today, no worries. There is plenty of room in future episodes of Ask Andrew Live, and we do those every Wednesday beginning at 9 a.m. Now, eventually, this will move over exclusively to the WQAD 8 Plus app. We've been showing instructions. Shelby Kluver has been showing those instructions every morning and even in the evening shows. So if you don't know how to install that on your smart TV, go ahead and give those instructions a quick look. They're also available on our web channel at WQAD.com. Super easy to install if you've got an Amazon Fire TV or a Fire TV stick, a Roku TV, Roku stick that is, or an Apple TV. You will be able to download the WQAD 8 Plus app, and you're going to be able to stream everything from Ask Andrew Live to our upcoming winter weather impact special, where we're going to talk about our winter weather forecast, and that's going to be released sometime next month exclusively on our streaming channel. So make sure and check that out. We'll talk more about that special as it gets a little bit closer. But we got to get through Election Day first, right? All the hustle and bustle of all that going on, that's going to dominate the headlines. We don't want our winter weather special to get lost in all the shuffle of that. So look for that after Election Day. And again, we'll let you know exactly when it will be available for streaming, and you can watch it at your convenience. That's what we love about streaming. It is on demand when you want it and what you want to see. So let's talk a little bit of weather first. We'll start that, and then we're going to get into your questions. There are some impactful moments that are going to be coming our way here in terms of the weather forecast. Starting with this morning, we've been keeping a very close eye on Doppler radar, which has actually had a couple of isolated thunderstorms that have started to pop up. Actually, I would say they're more scattered now as we're seeing a few more of these start to develop. They have a lot of what we call mid-level rotation in the mid-levels of the storm. That's promoting some small pea-sized hail with some of the stronger ones. And we're seeing that here up into parts of Bellevue and likely Galena. Likely getting some small hail south of town with those. There's a few more trying to get going north of Clinton near Thompson. Also here in the immediate Quad Cities, we're quiet, and there's not much on the Illinois side unless you're in Joe Davis County. But you go down here to the south and to the west, and we have a couple of those isolated storms that are trying to form and make their way to the north and to the east. So if we put a little tracker on this, if you're curious when this could eventually get into the metro Quad Cities, we're likely talking about sometime just before GMQC at 11. Going to keep a close eye on this because, of course, it's Craig Hignite Day. We don't want Craig out in the rain on the patio, so we'll likely have to make some alternative plans to move Craig inside. But these storms are in response to a powerful cold front that's going to be coming in here late tonight. You can see this line all the way from Madison, Wisconsin into northeast Missouri, and this is all moving primarily to the northeast. So it may be a few more hours yet before most of our central and southern hometowns on the Illinois side start to get some rain, but these will offer it in the Quad Cities again. It looks as early as 10:40 this morning. There is an impact. It's not an impact alert. It's not high enough to warrant that, at least right now, but we do want to put this out here. This is going to be from 8 this evening until 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's when we're expecting a few strong storms, and the need will be your Storm Track 8 app, your best resource to give you those watches and warnings as they come through. So grab the News 8 app or the Storm Track 8 app. Either one will give you those warnings right to your cell phone should some get issued. It looks very similar to what we got last Thursday. You remember those storms came in well after dark, had a wind report in Clinton of 60+ miles an hour and a handful of hail reports. So if you have a vehicle outside tonight, not a bad idea to keep an eye on that Storm Track 8 app. I do want to show you what's going on, not just here in the Quad Cities, but a substantial risk of severe weather from Kansas City down to Wichita, Kansas, even into northern parts of Oklahoma. That's where they have a 3 out of 5 on the threat track scale. Meanwhile, you go closer to home here, not as much of a threat. It's only a 1 out of 5, and that's because we're expecting isolated coverage of severe weather. And speaking of that, look at the tornado threat here in that same area that I just highlighted. This is actually kind of unusual for this late in October to get this kind of a threat this far north. But yeah, Kansas City down to a good chunk of eastern Kansas and northern Oklahoma, expecting the possibility of a few stronger tornadoes today, including EF2 or greater intensity. Now, that's not going to be the case here in the Quad Cities. We don't have the energy, the storm energy, nor do we have the spin that can go along with it to give us that kind of a threat. But there is a 1 out of 5 on the board for the threat of tornadoes as we go into this evening. That is expected to remain isolated. I want to reiterate that, and they are expected to be weak. These are the kind of quick spin up tornadoes you can get as a line of storms comes in, and I'll show you that here on Future Track in a second. I think my main concern is right here. That's going to be with wind gusts approaching, if not exceeding 60 miles an hour, and our secondary threat will be large hail up to the size of golf balls. So let's go to Future Track. I'll show you how this is going to kind of play out. And there you see the line of storms getting itself organized later this evening. Once we get to 5, 6 o'clock, healthy line looking there to the west of us. We get to 8, 9. That'll eventually make its way into the Quad Cities. And then we'll go east of the Quad Cities after midnight, eventually talking about Princeton around 1 a.m. We'll have a couple of showers tomorrow morning, and then that will be it for rain. We're not expecting any more rain beyond that, what we see in the morning. But this is going to be another healthy soaking like last Thursday. We're talking about 1/4 of an inch to as much as an inch plus, depending on where the heavier rains fall. Now, this is going to be all part of a more active pattern that's going to be settling in here, and I'll explain why it's getting a lot more active in just a second. But take a look at the rainfall opportunities and coverage from now all the way to the beginning of next week. This is definitely a pattern we have not seen in months, and you can see how that rainfall chance ramps up as we get to the weekend. Even an opportunity for some isolated severe weather on Sunday. We're going to keep a close eye on that. I think this is more impressive when you look at the rainfall amounts. At least 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch tonight. Perhaps another 5/100ths of an inch tomorrow. But you get into Saturday and Sunday, and we're talking about nearly 1/2 an inch on Saturday, almost an inch on Sunday, and then at least an inch on Monday. So we have the probability of picking up at least a few inches of rain, and there are some of our hometowns that could pick up even more than that. It is not going to bust the drought or get rid of it completely, but it will absolutely help the drought situation. That is for sure, especially now that most of the farmers have the crops out of the field. The soil is all tilled up. This is going to be a welcome sight. So we get an update to this map tomorrow morning. We'll see what the changes are in terms of the impact to this map with the rain coming in later this week and into the weekend. We're going to have to wait a couple of weeks to see that, but certainly I think we're going to be heading in the right direction. Why is it so quiet here all of a sudden, or so busy here all of a sudden? This is a question I've been getting a lot in person. The reason for this is the tropics have finally quieted down. We have not had to talk about a tropical storm for almost a week now plus. There's only one area of disturbed weather here. There's San Salvador. So if you go east of that, as you go south of the Caribbean, this is where we're going to be watching for some potential new development as we go into the next week. This, however, is going to have some big problems in terms of getting its act together and working off to the north and to the east. So even if it does develop, the likelihood of this impacting any part of the United States is going to be fairly low, and here's why. We have two different types of steering mechanisms with hurricanes and tropical systems, mostly dependent on the jet stream. But look at the jet stream pattern in the summer versus the jet stream pattern that we have in the fall. Big difference. In the summer, the jet stream is way to the north, but you get here in the fall, that jet stream starts to get further and further to the south. That allows it to steer these hurricanes most oftentimes in tropical systems right back out to sea. So very helpful. You get fewer landfalls in the fall season because of that versus more landfalls that occur in the summer months. In case you didn't know, it's a good little factoid there. Let's switch gears and let's talk about what's going to come up this Halloween. A lot of you wondering what the forecast is going to be. You see, yeah, we're going to have some rain showers early tomorrow morning. Temperatures then falling into the 50s throughout the day. This is not going to be the coolest, nor is it going to be the warmest Halloween on record. It's going to be just about right. And our friends at Climate Central help us dig through the data here showing Halloween extremes in the Quad Cities. You can see the warmest was 85 degrees back in 1950. Can you imagine having to trick or treat in a costume when it's 85 degrees outside? I think you get a really good handle as to what college and professional mascots have to deal with in that kind of a temperature. The coolest was 21 degrees in 2019, and I think we all remember that well. As I always say, it was kind of an omen to what would come later down the road, which was the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that coldest Halloween on record was a sure sign that something was going to happen later on that year, not to mention it snowed. The rainiest was in 1960. We had a little bit more than 1.5 inches worth of rain, and the snowiest, look at that. It was also in 2019 where snow covered the ground for the first time ever on Halloween. On average, Halloween is getting warmer by about 2 degrees since the 1970s. So this year, it's looking pretty average for us. This day in weather history, I want to get you that here too, because it was something interesting that happened. This was back in 1948 in Donora, Pennsylvania. 20 people were killed during a multi-day smog disaster, and more than 500 people actually fell sick, and I did a little research on this. This is one of the wire mills that was there in Donora, Pennsylvania. And what happened was, of course, we didn't really have the EPA back then. We didn't have pollution standards back then. And all of this smog and all of these chemicals from these plants and manufacturing hubs rose into the air, and then what we got was a perfect storm of temperature profiles. We had what was called a temperature inversion, or a layer of warm air aloft in the atmosphere. And what that does is once that inversion sets up, guess what? All of these toxic gases and all of this smog gets trapped at the surface. And this is actually something that lasted not for 1, not for 2, but it actually lasted for 5 days straight. There was a yellow kind of tint to the air. Very, very hazardous and deadly gases produced. That's why you had so many people killed and so many people that fell sick. So that's today in weather history, kind of a gnarly one, if you will, not a good one, but certainly something worth mentioning there. In case you missed it this morning, before we get to your questions that are starting to pour in here, let's review what we talked about this morning. This is actually a question that was trending on Google the last couple of weeks, and I actually had one come in from somebody locally. It was Jacob that had asked this question, and it's a good one, especially now that we're getting ready to switch temperature profiles again. Jacob asked, does a ceiling fan while the furnace is on really help save me money? And the answer is yes. And it actually helps you in a couple of different ways. Let's start with what's going to happen today, because a lot of us, if you're like me, have probably turned your air conditioning back on because it's gotten so warm. Well, when you have your air conditioning on, your ceiling fan is likely rotating counterclockwise. That is the default setting when you purchase a ceiling fan if you've never switched directions on it before. That produces a wind chill as that air blows on you from above, and it actually works to evaporate the sweat from your skin, making you feel cooler. But did you know that there's a little switch? Usually it's just below the blades and before you hit the light portion of the ceiling fan that you can flick in the other direction. And what it does is it changes the rotation direction of the fan to clockwise. And how that helps is during the heating season, you get a very uneven temperature profile. All you have to do is ask someone who's painted a ceiling in the winter months, which I have done many, many times. And look at the temperature profile if you do not have a fan. Up near the ceiling, it's 81 degrees. Meanwhile, your toes are freezing because near the floor, it's 64 degrees. And what are you tempted to do? You're tempted to reach over to that thermostat, crank it up even more to compensate for the cold air sitting at the bottom of your feet. Well, if you use a ceiling fan, and even on the lowest setting, spinning clockwise, what it does is it takes the warm air that's stuck at your ceiling and it pushes it out and throughout your entire room, giving you a more uniform temperature pattern. So that in the end will help save you money alone because you're not turning up your thermostat or turning down your thermostat depending on the time of year. And yes, it works. I'm one of those people. I have ceiling fans nearly in every room of my home, and they are on 24/7, always on the lowest setting. And I really do find that helps keep a more uniform temperature pattern in my house throughout the year. So the more you know. Just make sure you don't switch that little switch while the fan is running. You don't want to do that. That's not a good thing to do. You could risk some injury to your finger. Not to mention it's probably not good for the fan motor to start, quickly reversing it in the other direction, and the motor's got to catch up and try to work with all of that. So if you're curious about how all this works, it's already live at WQAD.com, and you can read more about it there. But it is a trending question on Google, and I wanted to make sure that we got that out there. And I see we have some questions rolling in here too. We're also keeping an eye again on Doppler radar to see what's going on with some of these isolated storms that are rolling through. Don't think we'll see any severe weather, but one or two of those stronger storms could have some small hail with it as we go through this morning. So our first question now comes from Steve Weber. Why have there been so many sundogs recently in the morning, at sunrise, and in the evening at sunset? So remember, with sundogs, we have to have a couple of things in perfect place for a sundog to occur. We need some ice crystals, and we also need, in the wintertime especially, a really chilly cold pattern above. So I'm going to see if I have my explainer, and I know I do. It's in there somewhere. But I will say recently, it's because we've had a lot of upper level cloud cover. That's what I have noticed. We've had this thin layer of clouds, especially the last few days, that have existed in the atmosphere. And if you're not familiar with what a sundog is, it is essentially two different rainbows. Sometimes it could be a complete circular rainbow around the sun here in the distance, especially on the horizon. You'll have one rainbow on the left, one rainbow on the right. That's actually really beautiful, and I think they're really more pronounced, especially in the wintertime, when we get a day where it is not only sunny, but we have some snow on the ground and temperatures are well below freezing, sometimes in the single digits. You can get those ice crystals that get suspended in the air. Those will form the sundogs really easily on a summer day. But for a time this year, it's mainly due to that high, thin level of cloud cover that exists in the upper part of our atmosphere. That's what's causing that. Great question, Steve. Thanks for sending that in. William is asking, while emptying my rain gauge from last week's rain, I noticed a red ring inside the gauge. What causes that? There's a lot of stuff that is sitting in our air right now. Because we have not had rain for so long, consistent rain, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of dust. There's a lot of allergens for those fall allergies that are going on. You got to remember, trees are losing their leaves. They're also spewing out some other little particles too as they get ready for winter. A lot of that is caused by what is floating out in the air. This has not been a clean rain that we've gotten, and I saw that last week with the storms that moved through on Thursday. I kind of warned you. I said, I apologize in advance, but if you're thinking you're going to get a free car wash out of this thing, not going to be the case. There's so much stuff in the air that it was not going to be enough rain to clear it all out, and we still got a lot of those dust and dirt particles trapped in the raindrops. And wouldn't you know it, I looked out at my car and I was like, dirty raindrops everywhere throughout. So that's going to be the case again with this rain, because that distance between the last rain we've gotten and this one is so great. We still have a lot of stuff that needs to get cleaned out of the air. And we're going to have a fantastic opportunity to do that, by the way, when we get into the weekend and next week, because that is when we actually have the longest period of wet weather in the forecast that we have seen in literal months. It has been so long since I've had a back-to-back solid rain chance, not one, not two, but 4 days here worth, starting later Saturday, but definitely Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Those are nearly all-day rains and some really heavy rain on Sunday and Monday. So that should really clear the air out a little bit more. If you want that free car wash, I think Monday is going to be the day to do it. We'll have enough of it on Sunday to clear most of the air out. Of course, the farmers are not done harvesting yet. I still notice there's quite a few fields that need some work yet. So it won't be long before the dirty particles-filled air is going to be returning again. But that's the number one reason why you're starting to see that kind of red ring or substance in your rain gauge, is because our air has just been filled with so many things. We got a question from a fellow Andrew that's asking, it's great to see this rain as we head into November. Could we see cooler and rainy November more than normal this year? That is a fantastic question. We are expecting the rainy pattern to continue to at least the first part of November. And in fact, through the middle part of November, when I was just looking at the recent outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. In terms of temperatures, we are expecting warmer than normal temperatures to continue through at least the first half of November. But there are definitely some signs that for the second half of the month, when I've looked into the long range, there will be some cooler temperatures and perhaps cool enough that we could, keyword could, not going to put out the prediction out there, but be talking about maybe a couple of rogue snowflakes mixed in as we get closer to the end of the month. But right now there's this consistent trend that we do stay either above normal, way above normal like we are right now, or we hang very close to normal here, then going slightly above by the end of week number 2. So you see our normals right now, 58 for a high, 37 for a low. By the time we get to the end of this 2-week period, we're trending back into the 60s again, but we're also trending dry. So that's something to keep in mind too. Again, just because we're going to be getting all of this rain here in the near term in the first week doesn't mean we can't dry out again in week number 2. And that dry soil has a huge, huge influence on our temperatures. Remember, we're not next to an ocean or a big body of water, so the ground is one of our bigger influences of the temperature pattern. And that is why likely it has been so warm here lately. Because that ground has been so dry, it absorbs a ton of heat. It also radiates the heat back a lot more effectively too. And that is one of the things that has contributed to so many record-breaking high temperatures the last couple of days. Amy's asking, we are in the La Nina cooler winter or still in El Nino for a warmer winter. I've heard it could be a bad winter this season. So we are expecting this year to head into a weak La Nina. We have not reached La Nina status yet. It's getting awfully close, but that is something that's going to be a big factor when it comes to our winter forecast. And we're going to talk more about this with our winter weather impact special that's coming up next month. But here's the current state of affairs if you're curious where we're at right now and where the forecast is tending to have us go here all the way through early spring. So as it stands right now, we're right in between the El Nino threshold and the La Nina threshold. We're right here. As we get into the upcoming winter, we are going to dip down into La Nina as early as January and then into February. One of the things to remember, though, is that this is a delayed response. The weather pattern is a bit delayed from what is actually going on. So that's why we're looking at a weaker La Nina scenario. And typically with a weaker La Nina, you tend to have slightly colder than average temperatures in the winter and slightly more snowfall than average. I think when we crunched all the numbers, it turned out to be around 5 to 6 inches more snowfall than we typically would see on an average winter. So that's what we're looking at right now, but we're going to dive deeper into the winter forecast again for our winter impact special, which will be coming our way in early November. It's all about putting these pieces of the puzzle together, and the more pieces of that puzzle we have, the more accurate the forecast and outlook is going to be. And we're getting one of the last pieces of the puzzle here in the next couple of weeks. Once hurricane and tropical season kind of gets itself settled and wraps up for the year, that's another thing that helps us predict what's going to happen this upcoming winter. But there you see consensus is that it is a weak La Nina this winter. So no El Nino. We had an El Nino last winter, and you can see that it was a very strong El Nino right at the top of the chart on the left-hand side of your screen. So the opposite of that, but doesn't mean necessarily the opposite weather of what we saw in El Nino. Also, another thing that we found that was interesting too with these weak La Ninas, we've had a few years that have featured some notable severe weather events during the winter months, including 2 separate instances of having tornadoes in December, January, and February during weak La Nina events. So if that's the case this year, we're going to have to keep a close eye on that. It doesn't mean we're not going to have a whole lot of snow, but it is interesting to note that we have had episodes of severe weather in the winter months during La Nina seasons. Stay tuned. Again, winter weather impact specials coming our way in November. We'll let you know when we have a date for that. We want to get election day out of the way first. There's a lot of noise and a lot of hustle and bustle with that, and we don't want our winter weather outlook to get lost in the shuffle of all of that. Let's see. Steve is right, yes, that the Native Americans said that a sundog was an indication of change in weather, and he's absolutely right, because you're increasing moisture in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's why you noticed yesterday you were seeing a lot more cloud cover come in, and actually this all started on Monday with the clouds that were streaming in, all ahead of this powerful cold front. So yes, the Native Americans, they were a smart group of folks. They had a lot of folklore, and actually, honestly, a lot of it tends to be pretty darn accurate, which is really cool to study. Kelly from Rock Falls, when it's windy, how are the gusts made and where do they come from? So wind is all a culmination of difference in temperature. The greater the temperature difference, the more wind you're going to have, because that temperature difference drives pressure changes. So where you tend to have really warm temperatures, you tend to have an area of high pressure. Where you have really cool temperatures, you tend to have an area of low pressure. And of course, it's associated rainfall. I'm going to see if I can find this up here really quick, a regional temperature map, because if I pull this up, we should be able to see quite a difference, not just here, because of course the front is still to our west, but we should see a noticeable difference in temperature as we go throughout the Midwest. And we're also going to see a lot more moisture today too. In fact, I'm already kind of feeling it in the studio. So let me go ahead and put in the Midwest temperature graphic. Let's see if we can poke around that here really quickly. There you see where the front is. It's right here, sitting in western Iowa. You go from temperatures ahead of that in the 70s and 60s, you go behind it, we're only in the 40s and the 30s. And between those two things, you've got a difference in pressure. You've got higher pressure here, lower pressure here. Mother Nature absolutely hates an imbalance of that. She likes to balance it out. So you've got this warm air rushing in to fill the void of the cool air and vice versa. All of that creates wind. And why do we get more wind this time of year? Because the temperature difference is much, much bigger. When you look at our forecast during the summer, it's fairly consistent. We're in the 70s and 80s for a long stretch of days. That's not the case this year. 80s yesterday, close to 80 today, 50s tomorrow. Big, big temperature swings will drive that big wind change. Great, great question. Tyler's wondering, with all this rainfall ahead, what is the record amount of days in a row without any measurable rain? Shockingly, we have not met that criteria. That is well in the 30s and the 40s for this time of year. And the highest amount of time that I could find that we were without rainfall, at least in the recent stretch, was about a week and a half to 2 weeks. So it didn't even come close to that, surprisingly, because we have had these little itty bitty rainfall events in between. Great question, though. We just have not gotten that far in terms of beating any of those records. And that's a good thing. That's a record you do not want to beat. That means you're in really, really bad shape. Laura's wondering if there's any air quality watches for those that have allergies or asthma. There really isn't. They don't track these kind of particles. What our air sensors track are things like smog and other types of pollutants. These particles being put in the air are much, much larger than the smaller polluting particles that we would expect during a day where they would issue an air quality alert. So this is just more of those that, you know, have a little bit more sensitivity to these kind of things, and you just kind of have to use a little caution if you're outside. Definitely sneezing a lot more, that's for sure, but this is a little bit different than what we talk about in terms of allergies or smog, like I did with that today in weather history. It's a really good question. You are quite welcome, Amy. Thanks for joining us this morning. And I've actually got everybody's question all answered. That's excellent. If we have a straggler in the comments, no worries. We will get to that question on the next episode of Ask Andrew Live, which of course will be next Wednesday, 9 o'clock, right here, either on our social media page or better yet, check it out on the WQAD 8+ app. Before I let you go, let's see what those storms are doing to the west of the Quad Cities, see if there's any more eastward movement with that. Again, we've got Craig coming up outside for GMQC at 11, and it appears, yes, we are going to have to move Mr. Craig Hignite indoors. We do have some thunderstorms incoming into the Quad Cities here, a little bit ahead of schedule, but there they are. There's Aledo, Preemption, right south of Muscatine, all that working its way to the north and the east. Rest assured, we'll definitely be on top of that line of storms as it comes in later this evening. We've got Peter Warner, our weekend weather anchor, anchor in for James Sahara today. Not expecting anything too exciting, but he'll definitely be the first to let you know if any warnings come out, as that'll be coming in right around news time, so the timing's good for that sake. Again, today's storms mainly a hail and a wind threat. Isolated tornado possible, but even I'm not that excited about that prospect. I think that's going to be further to the southwest. I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of Ask Andrew. I will see you later this morning for GMQC at 11. Have a great day.
Continue with us and watch free now on the 8 Plus app everywhere you stream.